The man we know as Clarence Thomas was born in 1948 in Pinpoint, Georgia, a tiny impoverished black community where the Creole Gullah language was spoken more than English. His father walked out when he was a toddler. Soon after, Clarence and his brother were taken in by their stern, no-nonsense grandfather, Myers Anderson. Anderson believed in three things: hard work, education, and the Catholic Church. He enrolled Clarence in a strict Catholic school run by Irish nuns and set him on a disciplined path. Clarence took to it. He wanted to become the town's first black Catholic priest, a dream rooted in faith, service, and the promise of uplift. But that dream shattered after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Thomas watched the church's silence in the face of racism and felt betrayed. He left the seminary. His grandfather was furious and kicked him out. Clarence was 19, broke, adrift and spiritually gutted. Still, doors opened. He was admitted to the College of the Holy Cross through a new affirmative action program. And there a new Clarence emerged. He joined the Black Student Union, wore a Black Panther beret and boots, and could recite Malcolm X speeches by heart. He led campus protests, including one in 1970 that erupted into violence on the streets of Cambridge. In 1971, shortly after graduating from Holy Cross, he married Kathy Ambush, the daughter of a prominent Massachusetts businessman. They had met in college, bonded over faith and ambition, and soon began building a life together. Their son Jamal was born in 1973, just as Thomas was starting law school at Yale. But the pressures of a young family, combined with the financial strain and Thomas's growing disillusionment with liberal institutions, began to take a toll. The marriage grew strained over the years, stressed by long hours, mounting debt, and Thomas's evolving political and personal identity. By the early 1980s, as his professional star was rising, his marriage was unraveling. In 1981, Clarence and Kathy legally separated. Their divorce was finalized in 1984. Clarence Thomas's post-Yale path didn't take him straight to the courtroom. It took him to Missouri. There, he crossed paths with Republican Attorney General John Danforth, who became both a political mentor and a career-launching connection. Thomas impressed Danforth with his sharp mind and measured demeanor, and soon found himself immersed in conservative legal circles. It was in Danforth's office that Thomas's ideological realignment was cemented. He formally changed his party registration to Republican and cast his first vote for Ronald Reagan in 1980. That same year, he joined Reagan's transition team in Washington, his first step into the federal arena. He quickly made a name for himself as a loyal, disciplined operator with a deep skepticism of liberal orthodoxy. He took a corporate detour at Monsanto, then entered the U.S. Department of Education, where he began challenging race-based policies he once benefited from. By 1982, the Reagan administration appointed him to lead the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. It was a powerful role, and a complicated one for a man increasingly opposed to affirmative action. At the department, Thomas built a reputation as a hardline conservative. He opposed racial quotas and championed a colorblind constitution. But within the workplace, especially among his staff, he was viewed as personable and approachable. His working relationship with Anita Hill, then a young attorney at the Department of Education and later at the EEOC, was professional by most accounts. He encouraged and mentored young black legal minds, both men and women. One small act of chance revealed the kind of loyalty Thomas could inspire. After losing his wallet, he was tracked down by a young John Bolton, who returned it. That simple exchange sparked a friendship that would span decades. Bolton would later become Trump's national security advisor. Symbolic shifts mirrored Thomas's internal transformation. He took down his Malcolm X poster, replacing it with a photo of a Rolls-Royce, a statement perhaps about a new definition of black ambition. In the midst of his fast-rising legal and political career, Clarence Thomas met the woman who would become his closest ally, and, in many ways, his ideological mirror. Her name was Virginia Lamp, better known as Ginni, a bright, outspoken conservative with a background in political organizing. Ginni and Clarence met in 1986 at a conference on affirmative action in Washington. The chemistry was immediate. They shared not only a sense of humor and faith, but a fierce commitment to conservative values. Just a year later, in 1987, they were married. By the late 1980s, Thomas's name was rising through conservative ranks. When Thurgood Marshall, the court's first black justice and a liberal icon, announced his retirement, President George Bush saw an opportunity to install a new kind of black jurist, one who opposed many of Marshall's views. In 1991, Bush nominated Clarence Thomas to the U.S. Supreme Court. His stance on key issues was already clear. He was firmly anti-abortion, once calling Roe v. Wade grievously wrong. He took a strict, originalist view of the Constitution, believing the government should play a limited role in economic and civil affairs. His opposition to affirmative action only hardened, and critics feared he would unravel the very legal protections that helped get him to the bench. Just as Clarence Thomas was poised to take his seat in the Supreme Court, the nomination process took a historic and dramatic turn. On October 6, 1991, just days before the scheduled confirmation vote, NPR published a leaked FBI report detailing serious allegations of sexual harassment made by Anita Hill, a former colleague of Thomas. The hearings were abruptly postponed and reconvened for a special session. What followed was a bruising, nationally televised confrontation between two sharply different narratives. Hill, then a respected law professor, delivered calm and meticulous testimony. She accused Thomas of making persistent, unwanted sexual advances, often veiled in disturbing conversations about pornography and sexual acts, including graphic discussions of large penises, group sex, and bestiality. He spoke about acts that he had seen in pornographic films. He talked about pornographic materials depicting individuals with large penises or large breasts involved in various sex acts. Hill also described how Thomas would repeatedly summon her to his office, where conversations would veer into the inappropriate, despite her clear discomfort and rejection. She said he had even spoken graphically of his own sexual prowess. Thomas, when called to testify, flatly denied every accusation. His rebuttal was emotional, defiant, and incendiary. In what became the defining soundbite of the hearings, he called the process a high-tech lynching for uppity blacks who in any way deigned to think for themselves. The phrase lit a fire among conservative supporters, many of whom believed Thomas was being punished for straying from liberal expectations of how a black man should think, act, or judge. The hearings, led by then Senate Judiciary Chair Joe Biden, quickly became a flashpoint in the culture wars. Biden controversially limited the scope of the reopened investigation. He allowed only a brief window of testimony, gave Thomas both the opening and closing word, and blocked 3 other women from testifying who had expressed similar concerns about Thomas's behavior. The result, an all-male, all-white Senate panel questioning Hill with often demeaning and dismissive tones. Hill held her ground, but the damage was done. The media circus, political posturing, and deeply gendered lines of questioning made clear how unprepared the system was to handle allegations of sexual harassment in public life. In the end, despite the firestorm, the Senate confirmed Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court in a narrow 52-48 vote, one of the closest in history. He had survived, but so had the scandal. The hearings would go on to shape public discourse around sexual harassment, power, race, and credibility for decades to come. After the storm of his confirmation, Clarence Thomas took his seat on the Supreme Court and immediately distinguished himself in ways no one quite expected. For years, he said almost nothing during oral arguments. Entire terms would go by without a single question from him. His silence sparked curiosity and criticism alike, but Thomas insisted he preferred to listen, not grandstand. "I think it's more important to let the lawyers talk," he once said. But make no mistake, on paper, his voice has been anything but quiet. Thomas quickly became one of the most hardline and consistent originalists on the court. Like his late colleague Antonin Scalia, he believed the Constitution should be interpreted exactly as it was understood at the time it was written. But unlike Scalia, who sometimes allowed for precedent to guide interpretation, Thomas often pushed further, willing to overturn long-standing rulings if he believed they deviated from the original meaning. Over the years, Thomas has carved out a judicial legacy that reshaped American law. On gun rights, he has championed expansive interpretations of the Second Amendment, arguing for individual ownership far beyond what prior courts had affirmed. On abortion, he has been unwavering, declaring Roe v. Wade constitutionally flawed from the beginning, and calling for its outright reversal long before it became politically viable. He's also taken firm stances on voting rights, supporting restrictive voter ID laws and weakening the Voting Rights Act in decisions that civil rights advocates argue have opened the door to modern voter suppression. On affirmative action, Thomas, who once benefited from race-conscious policies, has become one of its most consistent critics, insisting such programs stigmatize rather than uplift. Within the court, he has become the ideological anchor of its conservative bloc. While other justices shift, negotiate, or moderate, Thomas has remained unwavering, often writing solo dissents or concurrences that later become blueprints for future rulings as the court moves further to the right. In many ways, Clarence Thomas has built a judicial career not just in reaction to liberal legal thought, but in defiance of it. And whether admired or feared, his influence is undeniable. While Clarence Thomas has long been admired by conservative circles for his unwavering commitment to originalist jurisprudence, his presence on the court has sparked deep controversy, especially among civil rights advocates. Critics argue that his rulings have consistently chipped away at hard-won protections for marginalized communities. From limiting the reach of the Voting Rights Act to opposing affirmative action in higher education, Thomas has often found himself on the opposite side of the racial justice causes many expected a black justice to champion. But Thomas has never been interested in meeting expectations. His judicial philosophy rejects group identity in favor of individual liberty and constitutional purity. He has dismissed the idea that being black should determine his judicial perspective, an approach that has earned him fierce loyalty from the right and scathing criticism from the left. Outside the courtroom, questions have swirled around his personal and political entanglements. His wife, Ginni Thomas, has become a high-profile figure in conservative politics, her activism reaching into the heart of partisan battles, including efforts to overturn the 2020 election results. Her texts, lobbying efforts, and proximity to powerful political players have raised ethical concerns about conflicts of interest, especially when cases related to her causes come before the court. Clarence Thomas has refused to recuse himself in such cases, intensifying calls for reform and transparency. His relationship with wealthy conservative donors has also come under scrutiny. Reports have revealed luxury vacations, gifts, and financial ties that went undisclosed for years, leading to accusations that Thomas has blurred the line between justice and politics. From the marshes of Pinpoint, Georgia, to the marble halls of the U.S. Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas's life is anything but conventional. He rose from poverty, spoke a language rooted in West African heritage, and once dreamed of priesthood. Along the way, he became one of the most powerful and divisive judicial figures in American history. Through it all, Thomas has remained defiantly independent. "I don't follow the crowd. I'm not one of those people who's trying to be with everybody else," he once said. That sentiment, of walking alone, by conviction rather than consensus, has defined his time on the bench. To his supporters, he is a principled originalist, a man who returned constitutional interpretation to its roots. To his critics, he is a symbol of contradiction, someone whose decisions often run counter to the civil rights legacy of the justice he replaced, Thurgood Marshall. Is Clarence Thomas a defender of the Constitution, or a dismantler of progress? Thank you for watching another Fresh K documentary. If you found this video insightful, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's talk in the comments. What do you think Clarence Thomas's legacy will be? Trailblazer, traitor, womanizer, or something even more complicated?